My name is Aaron Levere, and welcome to my podcast. I explore the deep reaches of space and time to talk to the people influencing or influenced by knives. In an effort to unpack the rich and complex culture and history surrounding edge tools and adjacent crafts, I jump off into the abyss to talk about all things knives with special guests all the time. Join me as we reminisce of the good old days on the Good Old Blades podcast. I think that sometimes it's easy to look at successful people and think that it was a gift, miracle, or privilege that got them where they are. But for every success we see as outsiders looking in, there were thousands of mistakes, roadblocks, and discouragements that got between that person and their success. The ones who make it into the stream of our consciousness force their way in, like salmon running against a great current. Princeton Wong, his wife Mimi, and his beautiful children are what I see when I follow Prince customs. Maybe I'm a sucker for a backstory, but Princeton and his support system spur him on to take failure on the chin and innovate. And that's exactly what he does every day to create works of functional art inside of knives in the CNC industry. We sit down and talk about his journey to get where he is today on this episode. And Princeton, it's great to have you on the Good Old Blades podcast.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to finally make it on.
Yeah, finally. I think it's been a while since we talked, and I asked if you could be on. It's just, you're a super busy guy, so
Yeah, you and I both.
it's
so,
good.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. It's good to finally get to talk. And I think your particular vein of knife making and working with CNCs and things like that has always been something that I've been intrigued with, and it comes, I think, largely from the negative stigma that has come from just a long line of knife makers that CNC is not a permissible or legitimate form of knife making.
Sure.
And I kind of want to dig into that. I had Lucas Cow on from Squid Industries and talked a little bit about that, right?
Yep.
Yeah. And that's kind of one area where I think that he helped to shed some light on that. But then also, you've worked with a lot of the knife making industry and movers and shakers within that. And I kind of want, your mature take on that, since you've been working like so long and so much in that kind of field. So I think let's pause and talk a little bit about you. Where you came from, kind of what got you into knives and everything, like your origin story, as it were. And then we can progress into the other meaty conversations and stuff like that after that, if that sounds cool.
Sure. Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, go for it.
Do you want to start off with specific questions, or do you want me to just kind of go?
That's a good question. I think that I'm interested to know what got you into knives.
Okay.
I'm also interested in what where the CNC and machining lines like a transected or whatever.
Okay.
I'm not using the right word, but like and kind of like what got you to kind of the place where you are now.
Sure. Yeah, so I guess kind of started at the beginning with like when I was a kid. I was always the kid that was taking everything apart, dissecting all my transformers and video games, just trying to figure out how things work. And from there, just growing up, I actually went to art school up until high school. And from that point, I was like, oh yeah, I want to be an engineer, so let's just go to high school and study like math and all that kind of stuff, instead of going to like a magnet school specifically for like art. And followed that route for a bit, went to college, studied mechanical engineering for 3.5 years, and then actually ended up back in design. So I graduated with a graphics communication degree, and I was doing design work. But yeah, as I was growing up, like this whole time, being an Asian kid, I did a bunch of martial arts and was always exposed to that kind of weaponry and the blades and kung fu and all the Japanese martial arts. So there's always that fascination that came from that side of my upbringing with steel, the Japanese forging techniques and just the practical uses of swords and things like that. So that's probably where my passion really came from for blades in general. And in middle school, I actually started playing with Bali songs quite a bit. I think when I was younger, I had found an OTF at some store, but being a really little kid, my finger wasn't quite strong enough to, fire it and pull it back in. So yeah, I didn't get that, but I ended up getting Bali songs later in life and played with those for quite a while. And yeah, from there, I guess what got me into fabrication was really the automotive tuning side of things. So in high school and college, I was really into cars. Being in Texas, you have to have a car to get anywhere. So yeah, I just really loved that. And one time I just walked into a shop with a friend and saw what they were doing. They were building like these turbocharged Hondas and NSXs and really just fell in love with what I saw. And that just drew me into the whole metal fabrication side of things. And yeah, it just grew from there. But aside from automotive, I guess mechanical watches was the other interest that got me specifically into machining, or at least the interest about machining. So after high school, I used a bunch of money that I'd saved up either from like graduation money or, other things that I'd been doing. And I bought a little desktop CNC, a Sherline that had been converted to, computer and numerical control. And back then we are just using like M.A.C.K. and really crappy CAM software. But yeah, that got me started. I was just teaching myself on that thing. Yeah, right after graduating high school. So yeah,
So
that's like the early backstory, I guess.
yeah. So what when it comes to like work, like once you got like did you work during college, or was there something where you had like practical experience in a larger scale with CNC, or was that something that you graduated onto after you had kind of gone through this early self-education process in computer
Yeah, so all the work that I had done, like internships and things like that, that was all in the graphics field. So it's mainly graphic design, like print work or, web. And the CNC stuff was really just my own thing that I was just teaching myself all through college and then a bit afterwards, after I had graduated and, started working in graphics. Yeah, just been a thing on the side that I just tinker with and, break a lot of end mills and figure things out.
So at what point in time did that become a serious thing for you? Had you what had you been doing work wise, just graphics design and things like that,
Yeah.
and then at some point in time took the jump to manufacture more, or are you like are I'm actually not sure on this the answer to this
Mm-hmm.
question, but are you a full time manufacturer now, or kind of where does that sit in your wheelhouse?
So yeah, I'm full time at the fabrication shop now. And yeah, I don't really take on much external design work anymore, unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to view it. But yeah, definitely don't do graphics work or environmental design stuff anymore. at this point. But yeah, I mean, the whole CNC like manufacturing stuff didn't start until after our, yeah, quite a while after I had graduated, because I'd moved up to New York, uh, chasing Mimi. She was doing her graduate studies there in neuroscience at NYU. And of course, like being a, you know, entry level graphic designer up in New York doesn't afford you much space. So I had like my little desktop mill at the end of our bed in our New York apartment. And yeah, I mean, there's no manufacturing going on there. But after that, we moved to Japan, and I kind of tossed the idea around of, hey, do I do something here? But I don't really speak the language. And, you know, there's all that bureaucratic paperwork that you have to get around there. So even though like some people in the community had said, oh, we can find you a shop if you want to open something here, yeah, I kind of held off and didn't really jump in until after we moved back to Houston, like coming back from Japan. So it's a relatively recent thing. That was 2015, 2016 ish.
Yeah.
Mm.
What it's interesting. Like, I guess probably my exposure to Japanese culture, came from early days in karate.
Mm.
I studied shitoryu,
Yep.
and so there was always kind of like an I mean, this was like, early on. I was, like 6 or 7 when I was doing
Mm-hmm.
that stuff. But then the larger, I think, appreciation for the modern culture, not, martial arts and samurai and things like that, but and um, the philosophical side of culture, but more the modern culture came from anime
Uh-huh.
and other things like that. And I was really close to actually moving over there somewhere,
Okay.
but that didn't really pan out. There's working and family stuff and things like
Mm.
that. But I've always been interested in, like, was there a lot of culture shock in moving over there, and where approximately were you guys at in Japan?
Yeah, so we were in a small area, like pretty close to Kamakura, you know, where the black sand beaches are, stuff like that. It's a little southwest of Yokohama, so it's like a suburb area. But Mimi was working with Takeda, one of the big pharma companies out there, and yeah, so we're living right by where she worked, and yeah,
So they moved you out there in order to for her to work.
they did. Yep. Mm-hmm.
That's pretty cool. I always thought it was cool that, it's a little bit easier to get in there on work visas if you want to teach English or something. But then I was like, man, I barely understand the language.
Yeah, for
At
sure.
like 18, 19.
Yeah.
At 18, 19, I was like, this is not. Nobody wants to learn from
Uh
me.
huh.
So, but yeah, that's pretty cool. So you moved back to Houston, and then, um, what year did you guys move back here?
That was around 2014 or so.
And then after that, you started getting into the CNC side, or manufacturing side, rather.
Um, well, I was doing like contract, like environmental design work and graphics work when we moved back, and then I have a bunch of friends that are entrepreneurs, and just one day we decided to hop in a van together and just look around in the downtown area of Houston and see what warehouses are for sale. So we're just driving around looking at shops that were available, and yeah, I mean, I saw one that was like, oh, that'd be kind of a cool place to have if I could ever figure it out. And yeah, I mean, finally decided that it was the time to, you know, actually jump into one of my dreams, like having my own fabrication shop after Mimi had found something back home, you know. She was a bit worried that she would have to move to like the West Coast or the East Coast to one of the biotech hubs. So, I mean, there was a period where we weren't sure if we were going to stay in Houston or not. But, yep. So yeah, that's why it was a couple of years after we moved back. Yeah, to figure
Yeah.
out the shop.
So yeah. So what does that look like from an investment perspective? Is that something that you've been able to source largely within your family, or is it something that you've had to like, get loans for or whatnot? Because, I mean, from the outside looking in, real estate to house CNC machines and all of the, all the other fabrication things that you need seems like a pretty expensive endeavor.
Yeah. So fortunately, I had a really good credit already, and the owner of the space actually was kind of forced out because they were building public transit right in front of it, and they had like kind of blocked him out as they're building that train system for 2 years. So he had moved a few blocks down the street, and he was ready to get out of the space. So when we had started talking to him, found out he was cool to do owner financing. So I mean that definitely helped out a bunch. And yeah, I didn't have, even with good credit. I mean, it's not always easy to get a loan for a nice piece of land in like a downtown area. So yeah, that helped. And then my parents pitched in a bit for the down payment, and then just kind of took it from there. The first piece of equipment I got was a Haas, and their financing is super easy to work with. I mean, as long as you have even reasonable credit, they'll get a machine on your floor. So
Good to
hmm
know. The next thing I'm going to do is get a house, like a house shop, big enough that I can put a Haas in it, and then I'll do that.
yeah, no, yeah, they're super cool.
Yeah, I don't. I'll be honest though. Like one of the dilemmas that I have with CNC in general and everything is, and what I don't think a lot of people understand is like you got to be smart to run those things. Like there's so many elements of like technological prowess just to be able to get those things up and running, your code stacks or whatever,
Sure.
let alone the maintenance involved with it and understanding how to take that tool after you understand the fundamentals of the
hmm
technology and then be able to manufacture something with that. And then you got to go through all the research and development, breaking tools and things in order to get even further down the road.
Yeah.
So, what was the learning curve like with that? Do you feel like your early tabletop CNC work and everything helped in jumping up to the Haas and manufacturing other things?
Yeah, that definitely helped because I had a bunch of years where it didn't really matter if I was making money or not with that little machine, that I could just play around and kind of learn some of the basics and stuff like that. And I mean, it's still a big leap jumping into a Haas from, like a $2,000 machine, but yeah, I mean, it gave me much more confidence to make that leap for sure. And then, I mean, it's also much more accessible these days because of the software and even the tooling. I mean, there's charts from the manufacturers that kind of give you a head start compared to what we had, or what machinists had back in the day, or even what I had when I got the Shoreline. Like there weren't YouTube videos or anything back then. So yeah.
Yeah. And so when you started manufacturing, things with your
hmm
equipment, was the first thing knives, or were you doing other work first, or kind of what is the balance of a startup company doing machining look like for
Yeah,
you?
so I didn't jump full in like 100% shop time. I'd be there, but I was also still doing the contract design work whenever stuff came in. So that was kind of helping to pay the bills at the shop and the mortgage and stuff like that. And then yeah, just pretty much taking whatever I could. Um there wasn't really much of a balance cuz yeah, I couldn't really dictate what I was taking on at that point, like right when I started. But the first things I did were actually, I started off with laser engraving. I bought like a fancy fiber laser, before I moved into the shop. So I had that in our garage, after we moved back from Japan for a bit. And then when I took the leap and moved into the shop, the first things that I was doing there were automotive and also like architectural pieces, like decorative wall tiles and things like that.
So, what kind of things in the automotive space had you been machining?
So just like little brackets and miscellaneous stuff. Nothing like super complex, but yeah. One of the early jobs I took on was rebuilding this sequential shifter for a land speed car, that goes to the Bonneville Salt Flats. That was pretty fun.
Yeah, that's got a. So did you take the original part and then
Yeah, they had like a mangled original, and then I kind of reverse engineered some of the parts that they needed and remade the brackets and some bushings and stuff like that for them.
yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, to
And
get it up and running again.
yeah. So and then what does that look like when you is there any like feedback looping or anything like that that you get on projects that you work on, like you manufacture the stuff and then they test it out in their machine and you get feedback on its performance or anything, or is it just purely contractual and you just kind of wash your hands of it after it's done?
So a lot of the stuff that I do is just from personal connections. Like all the automotive stuff is basically from the shops that I knew back in the day when I got into that around college. So I mean, I'm still doing some like Toyota Supra stuff on the side here and there now for one of the shops that I worked with back in the day, like helping him build like induction systems and welding like intercooler piping and stuff like that. So I mean, I definitely hear back from those guys if they need to like tweak something or yeah, I mean, I get feedback for sure.
Are there any things that you've manufactured where there's been like catastrophic failures or things like that, or would you say that your acumen for reverse engineering and building things has been pretty high? Like, what I mean, what's the failure rate of taking something that you're conceptualizing
Uh-huh.
and then manufacturing that and then putting it into things and then it working the first time?
Um, so far I've had a really high success rate. I haven't actually had much stuff come back at all. So yeah, I've been lucky.
Well, the reason why I ask is kind of leading into what the process looks like for you in your everyday knife making and how you come up with some of these ideas. Like for the last few years, you've made those the shuriken, right, for Blade Show and things like that. Like, kind of like what I guess causes you to do those type of things and what I guess, well, first, what causes you to think of those things, and then what's the
Mm.
ideation process through to actually getting it on the machine and cutting it out and prototyping it?
Sure. So something like the Ninja Stars, the Shurikens. Um, that was actually a request from Henry Wu. He asked me if I could make some Ninja Stars in the, in the, how do I say it? To kind of reflect on the idea of a like sheriff's badge, like a Western style badge for Blade, Texas, and that's how that all started. It was a direct request, and yeah, who doesn't want to be a professional shuriken maker?
Yeah, if there was a niche business
Yeah,
for that, I think that would be pretty cool.
yeah.
Um, so then you just go through the normal design process and then prototype it out. I mean, I'm interested, I guess, in when you take an idea like that and
Hmm.
you go into the manufacturing process, is everything pretty much up to specification, or are there things where you have to like tinker around with it and go from, your CAD design and everything to the machine and back and forth in order to refine ideas.
Sure. So, I mean, there's definitely some back and forth when you're doing the initial design, but I mean, that's mostly like in drawings or CAD. You can see a bunch of the stuff and tweak it there. Um, on something like the Ninja Stars, the tolerances aren't quite as important as a knife or like an automotive part. So that was pretty straightforward once I just figured out how to fixture and machine it all. But yeah, I mean, there's always a little bit of tweaking here and there. I mean, depending on what end mills you're using, you have to tweak like finishing passes and stuff like that, but nothing too major on something like a Ninja Star.
Sure. And how much time is actually spent building fixtures and things for the work versus actually, going through the milling process?
Yeah, so I think probably a third to one half of the time is spent figuring out your fixturing and programming it. Um, yeah, I mean, it's pretty significant, I would say. Because, I
Makes
mean,
sense.
that's your basis for, all your manufacturing, like leading from that point on. So you do want to make sure you have it right.
Yeah. And I mean, my thing too is depending on what your processes are, your fixture creation and everything is sometimes a very one-off, depending on what kind of thing you're manufacturing itself. Correct?
Yeah, exactly. So, like with knives, I mean, it's mostly flat pieces. So a lot of the fixturing is all the same for that. Can mount it all on a plate. I know a lot of people use vices, but I try to stay away from vices. Um, yeah, but I mean, on more intricate stuff like the lever on that wine key knife that I do, I mean that took a lot more design and figuring out than just machining the flat pieces for sure.
Yeah. So when you're doing the actual corkscrew itself, are you
Uh,
machining the entire corkscrew, or
I
how
am.
exactly does that work? Well, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it starts from a titanium round bar, and yeah, I didn't have a lathe when I was like making that originally, so I actually just did it on a three-axis mill, and it was like 7 operations on a mounted to a plate. So
Yeah, that makes
yeah.
sense. What's the failure rate look like on parts like that? I mean, because in order to get the geometry
hmm
right on a corkscrew, it seems pretty dainty, especially if it shifts or things like that when it's being milled. I mean, what is that a little
Yeah,
bit more?
so machining wise, I haven't messed any up like when they're fixtured in to be machined. So I mean, there's not really a failure rate there. Um, I guess in the design process, like getting the thread pitch and that kind of stuff and the thickness correct was more of a where I had failures.
Yeah, that makes sense. Kind of, so we kind of touched on my interest in talking more about like how like the legitimacy of CNC works within inside like or within the realm of custom knife making, right?
Sure.
And I think probably the thing I hear the most is, well, you can just put it on a CNC machine and make a million of them,
hmm
and they come out exactly the same. In your practical experience, is that the case?
Um, if you know what you're doing, they would come out mostly the same. I mean, it depends on what kind of tolerances you're trying to hold yourself to. So realistically, no, they're not all the same, but to general knife making tolerances, then they're close enough to being the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, unless you're like really messing something up or not watching the condition of your end mills and stuff like that.
Yeah, but I mean, what is the practicality of I guess, larger manufacturing, because I guess from my vantage point and what I
Mm-hmm.
see with the things you bring to shows and the work that you do and everything, it
Mm-hmm.
seems to be a lot more small batch than, just ripping through, I don't know, 500 of something and
Sure.
putting it on the market.
Yeah. So I mean, if you like walk into my shop, I definitely have the capability to be at least like a mid-scale manufacturer. Um, if I wanted to like stand there and just load parts all the time, or hire somebody, but I'm using CNC more like a tool than like something just to knock out a bunch of stuff. Um, yeah, I mean it's just another tool in my toolbox, like I have with grinders and all that other stuff, and yeah, I just like the precision of what I can do with the CNC, and yeah, use it. I don't think it's a handicap or something negative. So
Yeah. Well, and I mean, and so all of your blades, you're grinding by hand, and I don't mean like using fixtures or things like that, but like when you get done with the CNC process to
hmm
get the tolerance on everything, then you're going through and grinding the blades after the fact.
um, predominantly not. Most of my bevels are actually machined. Like maybe 98% of them.
Okay.
Yep.
And and how is there in the machining process for the bevels, how close to tolerance is it actually getting? Like, is there finishing work or things like that that are required after the fact to get it to the final state that we see it when it's on your table?
It depends on the knife. I mean, some of them, you bring to a different finish, like damascene steel and stuff like that. But I mean, if you're just doing like a user finish, blasted and stonewashed, then yeah, it comes off the machine. I blast it, stonewash it, and then put an edge on it, and that's it.
That's pretty cool.
Yep.
Um,
But yeah, I mean the edge or the thickness behind the edge, that's all machined to thickness. So
and then all the heat treating is done, uh, I assume by hand. I've seen like even heat kiln stuff in the background before that you've done.
yeah, I do all the heat treating. I use argon in the bags just to kind of keep it inert, and I like not having a bunch of discoloration on my blades. Saves a bit of finishing time. So
Yeah, I've thought about using argon, but then keeping gas in a residential area too seems like a pain in the butt. So, I mean, I know it's inert, but I mean, just like all the stuff that you have to do in order to keep up with running argon seems, well, I mean, I,
I
I
think the
hate
only
making,
thing about residential is the delivery trucks can't come into a residential neighborhood, so you would have to take your cylinder and get it refilled at the facility.
yeah, that's my understanding
Yeah,
too. I mean, lugging around a big cylinder and stuff is a little bit of a pain,
it's a good
but
workout.
yeah, if you saw me, you'd probably say, "Hey, this guy needs to work out a little bit more." But yeah, no, I get that. Well, it's also, in I, I didn't get argon on my Paragon because I wasn't exactly sure if the like brick oven design in
Uh-huh.
in the oven itself was what I wanted to stay with as a
Sure.
final form.
Okay.
I've looked at some even heat Paragon and hot shot ovens to see if like potentially what I have right now is either too big or it definitely takes a while to heat up.
Sure.
But I know that they have the Pro series and everything that you can get with Paragon that makes it
Mm.
a little bit easier. Um, but yeah, argon, making the little coupons, the little envelopes for all my blade work and everything is probably one of the biggest pain in the butt that I've experienced in heat treating. It would be nice just to be able to throw it in and pull it out and quench it.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. But I mean, filling the bags with argon, it doesn't take too long. So yeah, that haven't viewed that as too much of a pain so far.
Yeah. So, describe that to me because my understanding with some of these argon ready heat treating ovens is that you actually have a valve on it where once it's heating up, you actually evacuate the air out of it and just pump a small amount of argon into it. What bag mechanism are you using?
Yeah, so I'm stainless on my blades, so I'm just using the heat treat foil and using those Valpak envelopes to seal all my blades. So before I do that final fold, I'm like basically filling it with argon, and then I do the last fold. So it's the argon replaces the air in the bag, and yeah, you have an inert environment without having to
I
worry about like purging out your whole kiln.
I see. I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the. So I mean that's interesting because you're still using the stainless envelopes, but just
Mhm.
putting inert
Argon
gas
within
in
it.
it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I
yeah,
mean you can use nitrogen too. I think it's cheaper, but I have argon around for my welder and stuff like that.
that's pretty cool.
Mhm.
I don't think I've ever actually thought about doing that. I just thought about getting the heat treating ovens that were argon ready, but I
Sure.
also don't, I don't know how much they actually consume in a given heat treating session.
Yeah, it
So
kind
it's
of
one of those.
depends on how well the kiln is sealed, I guess. But yeah, it shouldn't use all that much, but it's definitely much less if you're just filling a little bag like for a few seconds versus like an hour heat treat. But,
And when you're closing up finally with your last folds,
mm-hmm.
how easy is it for the argon to stay in that envelope versus like I mean, do you have like a period of time that you can wait, or does it have to be like immediate in order to capture it all?
um, so I mean, I guess argon's heavier than the oxygen. I keep the bag upright. I do the first fold like while it's upright, so it's not like spilling out, and then I immediately lay it down and seal it with a roller, and then do the second like sealing fold. Because people do like two or three folds. But yeah, I mean, the argon stays in there as long as you're not like tilting the bag over or something like that.
Smart. I'll have to think about that. I don't think I ever really thought about it too much. I mean, I'm not the smartest person in the world, but that definitely seems like a good medium because I get discoloration. Depends on the steel, I think,
Sure. Uh-huh.
sometimes. But I've had some pretty pretty good rainbowing and stuff going on,
Yeah.
even though it's just like surface. I mean, I Rockwell hardness test all like everything to make
Hmm.
sure it's to spec. But
Yeah, I mean, the
um,
main reason I do it is that sometimes I don't like having to deal with the finishing work that comes with discoloration. So yeah, it just saves me
yeah,
time that way.
yeah. Do you think that you've always been that pragmatic when it comes to like thinking through processes and everything? Because I mean, my impression at least is that you put a lot of thought into like what you want to do, and then build the systems by which you actually are doing everything.
I try to as much as time allows. I mean, definitely when I'm like building something out, I spend a lot of the time in the front end trying to think it through just to make sure it works as close to possible the first time, or that I have enough wiggle room in like say a fixture setup that I can tweak it without having to rebuild entirely. So yeah, I do spend a lot of time like thinking on the front end.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense. What do you think the cost benefit is of running CNC in your shop versus doing things by hand? Because I mean, like for me,
Mm.
I've always it's probably because of working in like farming and kind of fabricating tools and things that you need that are crude
Uh-huh.
tools and also jewelry. Like pretty much jewelry, there is no real manufacturing process unless you're doing something in the casting side
Sure.
of things, or you're really pulling in manufacturing processes
Uh-huh.
into it. What I was doing when I was in jewelry is all custom work,
Gotcha.
and so doing full custom. I mean, really, there is no molds, there is no
Mhm.
things. You either carve wax and do investments, or you start with raw materials like rods and
and you work the
flat
material itself. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it is really like it's full custom, pretty much start to finish. You don't really have options otherwise. But
I mean, even when I like dabbled in jewelry before, like I guess I started off with what most would consider like the manufacturing side. You 3D print the wax instead of carving it. You know, you do the design on a computer. And even though I was just doing like a handful of them, yeah, I mean, I just went that route instead.
Oh yeah, for certain custom jobs when I was working in this jewelry shop, we would get estimates to get wax, machined out or whatever, and it's interesting because the mentality around like cost of getting that like perfect thing, it's like, so the difference would be maybe a wax would cost like $500, and you'd have to add that on to the price of whatever piece it was.
Sure.
And sometimes, we're working in custom jewelry with some of the diamond sets and other materials that we're using.
Yeah.
I mean, $15,000 was not unreasonable.
Yep.
All the way up into $50,000, $60,000, $70,000. It just really kind of depends. But like, I mean, high end. And $500 for design fees and whatnot, a lot of people would scoff at that. They're just like, do it the old-fashioned way and charge me the time. And I'm like, I don't really know that there's that much of a benefit.
Yeah.
To do it the old-fashioned way. It costs a lot of time and energy that you're going to be paying for because, in custom jewelry, it's like whatever your cost is, it's about 300% in overall labor and margin. It's just whatever it costs times 3, and that's basically what you're going to charge the end user.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe those customers, just like with custom knives, they're looking at it like, oh, I like that personal involvement more than, what they view as a machine or something like that. So they just tell you to do it the traditional way because they like it.
Yeah. I mean, maybe, but the problem is that like one of us would have to carve the wax and we'd still do it the same way. But we just, I wouldn't get paid $500 to do a wax carving.
Yeah.
It would be, whatever that takes. And I was not a really great wax carver, like by any means, rudimentary at best. But there's certain things like if we had existing molds and there was something that we wanted to put out for like showroom tchotchkes, I would say.
Okay.
You want to do something in silver or some, lower alloy golds. It would be like, taking the waxes and then modifying them with rotary tools and things to do something different. And
Gotcha.
then we would invest those and then see kind of how they did on the floor. And then if they did well, you try to promote those or maybe do them in gold with stone settings or things like that. But it was always like a trial and error.
Gotcha.
But if it came to like real complex stuff with multiple settings, you want to get as close to the final form in your investments.
The first time.
So it's interesting to me because I don't know that human involvement is prone to error. And
Exactly.
And I don't. If I had the mind to actually learn how to manufacture things through 3D printing or using more, more CNC driven technology, I think I probably would. It's just I've been in this mentality of like, well, heck, I could just I can figure it out. I'll just like do some prototyping in micarta or G10 or wood or something, and then move on to the next step.
Yeah.
So to me, in prototyping things, there always seems to be way more steps to get from ideation to something that you can put in steel, unless you're just going and grinding things. But the thing that I hate the most is like, you come up with some idea and it works real well. Maybe there's great, public reception. And then
how do you repeat it from that point?
Yeah, you never planned it. So now I got to go back through and reverse engineer and do it right the second time, when I've already spent like 9 times trying to get it to the place where it was at. So it's I don't know the over under, like what is the cost benefit of going old school versus being able to use tooling. I don't really know, but
Yeah, I
it's
guess it
always
just depends on what kind of shop you are or what your goals are. Because I mean, doing it the old school way, depending on what you're making, I'd have to throw that caveat out there is that it definitely seems like it could be faster to do it the old school way, like grinding it out and making one real quick. But yeah, I mean, I like to push my machinery, so I mean, some of these things that I'm prototyping, I'd probably be crazy to try to like hand file. So I'm definitely doing that stuff on a machine.
yeah. Do you ever find yourself doing one-offs for knives and things, or is it mostly like repeatable things that you can kind of modularize and pick apart and do different stuff with?
Um, I mean, a lot of the stuff that I do, it starts off, like with the idea of like it's the one off. But then, like you said, I mean, I'm already set up to make more of it if people happen to like it. So, I mean, that's why I pretty much jump all over the place with my design because it keeps my mind going. But yeah, that's the other reason I don't do like huge batches is that, I love that whole process of design and then bringing it to a physical object. It's just my process and includes the fixture design and all that kind of stuff in between as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm not sure if there's a real way to weigh the cost benefit because I mean if you're not planning to build a bunch of stuff, it's definitely cheaper to build a few with a grinder because you can do a lot of stuff with a 2x72. You don't have to invest in a expensive machine and the power and all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah. What kind of power consumption do you go through in a standard like Haas like you have?
Haas is quite low, so I mean that I wouldn't really be worried about power wise. The one I started off with was one of the tool room mills, and he got it specifically because I could run it on a single phase panel. And yeah, I mean, it wasn't pulling any huge power. So not until like the more recent stuff that I've gotten that like really requires some power. But yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, do you monitor at all, like in a standard operation, how many kilowatts it pulls or anything like that, or do you do like economy of power draws on your machinery?
Not too much. I mean, I just kind of watch my monthly bill because I'm curious, like, oh, how much did it cost this month? But even when I moved to like a water jet, which requires 70 amps at 480 volt, um, yeah, I mean, my power bill's not realistically that much more every month. I mean, it doubled, but that's also because I have other machines running and AC. So
Yeah, that makes sense. Kind of going back to like the um, like the knife design component, like where do you draw your inspiration from? Because like I can kind of see some elements of like traditionalism inside of your knives, and I can see definitely some new age, like some Art Deco, like influences and things. Like what is your style of knives, and have you ever really like I mean, have you ever got into that, or is there a purpose? Um, I guess a statement or whatever with the way that you design your specific knives.
yeah, I wouldn't say that I have a specific design style because I find it a challenge to kind of delve into other styles like here and there as I can. But I mean, my general influence would just be like pop culture or things that I grew up with in the past. Like, of course, I look at architecture and automotive design, and yeah, just draw whatever I can from whatever I see in my environment. So yeah, I mean, each design I mean, most of my stuff's changed quite a bit from knife to knife, just because it's whatever I'm feeling at the moment. So it's kind of hard to nail down like, oh, this is my style, or at least in my eyes. I don't know if some people see like a parallel between the various designs that I've done.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's kind of weird because I say that the concept is weird because it seems like uh, knife makers or craftsmen that focus purely on what's inside of their mind when
Hmm.
they're expressing things, that their personal aesthetic
Like veers one
emerges.
way or another. Yeah.
Well, and it emerges quicker than if you're somebody like I've gone through the tribulations of designing things that are other people designs. You know,
Sure.
like they're something that somebody else has largely thought of. There's mostly traditional aesthetic, and I mean traditional just in the fact that somebody else is mostly trampled that path.
Sure.
It's not inventive. Like I would look at some of your knife aesthetic, and the closest I can think of is Michael Walker,
Mm.
and some of the things that he's done. Like that's kind of, it's very sci-fi. It's very like a little bit of like this Art Deco thing,
Hmm.
and it just interests me. Like where do people kind of get that? Like where, like, because you could go with rudimentary knives, I guess. I mean, I say rudimentary is like not complex like you're doing, and you know, do just as well. But you always seem to come up with these really crazy combinations of materials and specific geometries on like your pivot areas and blade designs and whatnot. And to me, it's just it seems like an awful lot of work in the ideation process. And I don't know sometimes if I'm that kind of maker.
Uh-huh.
Like to me, it seems like just a different wavelength of thinking about lines and thinking about textures and other things that it would go into making all that stuff work, and
Yeah.
you do it really well.
Thank you. I guess, especially when I started out, I kind of tried not to really like look into the field. That's kind of the way I am in general. But I just do my own thing and see if people like it or not. And yeah, just go with that. Es- Especially in the beginning. But I mean, of course, now, I mean, I've been exposed to so many designers and stuff like that. Uh, like I said, I mean, I draw inspiration from my environment and what I see. And yeah, some of that probably made it into some of my more recent designs. So, um, yeah, I mean, I always just try to do what I feel like makes me happy, for better or worse, design wise.
I get that. Um, so I mean, with what you're doing, every knife maker has a different, I guess, concept of what success looks like to them. But from what I like, everything I understand about you is you've kind of been a march to the beat of your own drum. So like what pushes you? What are you actually trying to like look for? Not just in like design gratification, like turning something that you've thought of into something
Hmm.
that you've made, but what exactly is your driving force in doing this and coming up with these new things?
Um, so outside of like just the aesthetic design, like it's that chase for like the mechanical function and understanding of that. Um, I mean, there's so many different opinions on, the best way to do this or that, but unless you do it yourself, you don't really know. So I mean, with each design, I'm always trying new things like different lock geometries, lock inserts and all that kind of stuff, and attempting different ways to do things as much as possible. So I think it's that chase of becoming better and furthering my understanding of a field that I love that really pushes me.
That's cool. And what do awards mean to you? Because I know you've been kind of on the radar and been awarded for quite a few things. I know that you had what year was it that you had best new maker at Blade Show 2021? I guess it was.
I think so. Yeah.
And was that the same year you got into probationary into the guild?
It was, and also got I think most innovative design at Blade Texas that year.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
How what was your guild experience like being in CNC and then going through the probationary process?
So it was all accepting. I got one comment during one of the inspections, but it wasn't necessarily aimed towards me. It was just one of the inspectors said, "Oh yeah, I'm 100%. I'm 100%er." It's like, "Oh, that's cool. I mean, nice to meet you." So it wasn't really like, "Oh, I'm better than you," or I just do it this way, or at least that's how I viewed it.
Do you think have you had a lot of pushback in your specific style of making with the I'm using air quotes here traditional knife makers?
Not, at least not that they've come up and said to me. Um, from what I've seen, the industry's been super accepting to me, which has been awesome. Um, yeah, I mean, I think might like bother some people because like some people have told me that that first design that I did, the Daruma that had like all the swoopy lines and wing geometries and stuff like that, they're like kind of doing like art knife, but it's CNC, so it's kind of uncomfortable for some people. But other than that, I haven't really heard much. So
Yeah, what I've learned in my time in knives so far is that knife makers, especially traditionalists or purists, can be a little petulant, and so it's kind of difficult, because you're out here just doing a thing, and then you have people just like try to shoot you in the back a little bit
yeah.
with your stuff. But it's actually interesting to me that with some of the fervor around traditionalism
Uh-huh.
that the knife makers guild had appealed to you at all. It was, what made you decide to get into the guild versus I don't know, I guess not accepting that kind of institution and um, what's the word,
Well, I mean,
and
I
scrutiny,
guess
I guess.
I always believed in the outright goal of helping other knife makers, like sharing knowledge and that kind of stuff. Thought that was cool when I just first learned of it. And then realistically, it was just talking to Jim Skelton and Todd Begg in the early days of when I was making knives, and they kind of pushed me into looking into it. So yeah.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah. Two knife makers that I definitely think broach the same kind of design aesthetic and material choices and stuff. Like, I mean, I don't actually know how much.
Yeah, I mean, I guess Todd Begg would be a good example of like a guy a little bit earlier on using CNC and breaking those barriers. So he probably had much more pushback than I ever will experience.
Yeah, that it's interesting, in the sense that we all in some way rest on the shoulders of giants like those who have pioneered
Mm-hmm.
some level of technology or
Yeah,
mindset difference or things like that
sure.
in order to make it just a little bit easier.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't really. I'd love to have Todd on at some point in time and be able to talk through that and kind of what he's experienced separately.
Oh yeah.
Especially with being like achieving president of the guild. But
Mm-hmm.
like I'm interested. So you in 2021 you were probationary, right?
Yeah.
And when did you get voting? Was it the same year that you got voting member status that you were also voted in as the secretary for the guild?
Yeah, it was the same year. I guess 22, I believe. Yeah.
And how's that been? So being secretary.
Uh, I guess it's work. um, it's really nothing crazy, other than explaining to people like when the fiscal year is every year. But I've made some changes that kind of have gotten around the questions. Like every time I send out like due statements, I've timed it differently. So yeah, that's toned down quite a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and it's one of the what I will say is that for the level of involvement that I've had in the guild, when I was a probationary member, I volunteered to redo the website and
Yeah.
things, and it seemed like at the time I was the only one that knew anything about technology,
Sure.
and it's been nice because through that. Man, it took almost a year to get from saying, "Oh, hey, like maybe we need to be able to update things and not have old content right all the time,"
Yeah.
but and then to getting a website that we can dynamically update or whatnot.
Yep.
To you being able to, as a secretary, take all of that over, and really you're just doing a phenomenal job at being able to not only keep the books, but then help to manage the logistics side of running the guild as
Sure.
if it were a business, I guess.
Yeah. So I mean, when I came in, everything was pretty much done by hand. I got a bunch of books that were just basically in notebooks, and yeah, I just wanted to bring everything up to date as much as possible. Started automating stuff or putting it in Excel spreadsheets. Try to help you out with the website here and there where I could. And then, yeah, once we got that recommendation to go to Membership Works from Jason Fry, implemented that on the site so that we have all the member listings, all the dues are tracked on the website and stuff like that now, and we have much more capability to reach out to members, to set up stuff once we ever get around to it. But yeah, I mean, my whole goal is to automate the whole system and make it as streamlined as possible, where there's less mistakes, less work on the director's side, and something easier to hand over instead of like a stack of paperwork that you have to dig through manually.
Yeah, but you know that in creating this technological sophistication, you've pretty much guaranteed that nobody else is going to want the job.
Well, I don't know. We don't know what other young guild members are coming in that know all this stuff. So times change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that is true. I mean, we gotta
Look to the future, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think something that I've appreciated is that when I was quite a few years before I actually got into the guild, there was a lot of older knife makers that were in, maybe not founding members, but definitely in the early years that were like, man, like you don't need the guild. Like there's a lot less bureaucracy if you just do it yourself and put up a website. Like the internet is a magical place.
Yeah.
But something that I still agree that the internet is a great place to sell knives and to get focus towards your knives and stuff like that. But I really, as a working in IT so much, I really fear for the reckoning that's probably going to come sooner than later, where online, like the online proliferation of quote unquote weapons is going to be very highly curtailed, and we've seen it in all of these. I mean, it's not political, but it's kind of like you're kind of grouped in political ideologies. So
Sure,
like
yeah.
if you make knives, then you like guns. If you like guns, then you're some political affiliation. If you
Sure.
do that,
Yep.
then you can't do these things. And the problem is that it's not looked at as just a craft. It's looked at as a craft that has at least some tangential touch to things that more people care about, and because of that, we suffer with the reality that
Yeah, we're
it
tied
just
in with all
takes.
these other negative views.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and not just that too, but they're really it's different. I think when you're talking about constitutional rights or things where you have the right to do certain things, but selling stuff that people deem as part of their acceptable use policies as weapons or against them or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a constitutional slight. It's like
Yeah.
they don't have to do that. And so at
Yeah, I
any
mean, and
point in
we have the
time,
right to use whatever company, and it's in their rules. So I mean, what can we really say? you know?
well, yeah,
Yeah.
and that is kind of the thing though, is like, I guess what the point to be made is that I don't know if we're really out of the woods when it comes to considering what organization means to a craft, like a guild or a group or
Mm-hmm.
some type of conglomeration of people that kind of do the same thing.
Yeah.
It's just like, I mean, the way that we got started was piggybacking off of gun shows
Uh-huh.
in the guild, and then we moved to like this thing where we're our own unit, and then we kind of get dispersed because of like bureaucratic drama and the internet,
Mm-hmm.
and now it's very easy for me to see that if things go or progress in a certain way, that we could end up back into really relying on
Like a
like a
guild type
membership.
thing,
Yeah,
yeah, to make our
yeah,
sales. Yep.
yeah. I mean, because
I think
we're
that's
more.
mainly because knife makers might not have I guess, the financial backing or even, the knowledge to get into the side of things where, guns and the firearms industry, they've kind of skirted around all the problems, in their own way. But I mean, yeah, I doubt like individual knife makers are going to be able to set up systems to really get around that if they really start cracking down.
Yeah, well, because I mean, the reality is that guns, and I mean, firearms in general have always had a manufacturing component to them that makes it actually like a real big boy business.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly. Yeah. So I mean, they have the financial backing to actually make a difference, So
Yeah, and there's not that many of them. I mean, if you look at how many fly by night weapons manufacturers there have been, they kind of like maybe their guns are a little bit cheaper. They can manufacture them a little bit more agilely because they are mom and pop. They don't
hmm
have the manufacturing bureaucracy and lots and stuff like that they have to produce.
yeah.
But then just as quickly, they just don't manufacture anything anymore. Like I used to, dabble in custom builds and
hmm
things, and I can't tell you how many parts I have in various
Yeah, where the manufacturer
fire.
doesn't exist
Yeah,
anymore.
yeah. It's like, well, it'd be nice to get this guard or this trigger or something like that, but sorry, I mean, I can't anymore. I mean, even entire like AK builds or things.
hmm
There was a company in Houston, I think it was, that was manufacturing reasonably priced AKs because you couldn't, I mean, it's just untenable to have Kalashnikovs anymore. And I mean, I remember a guy I used to be associated with said that he could just get them shipped directly over from Europe
Uh-huh.
in crates in their original Cosmoline, and they were like dirt cheap.
Okay.
But this manufacturer of this one AK that I had, they went under. I mean, I didn't realize it, but they went under like 7 years before I actually bought the thing, and I
Oh
was
wow.
like, cool.
Okay.
Like it'd be cool to buy like more of these things. It's like,
hmm
nah, you can't do it. So it's I guess it's one of those things where we have to actually be good stewards of making like back doors and making relationships and doing networking that is not tethered to a single sales mechanism a la social media, I
Sure.
think.
Yep.
And that's the reason why, like, I've kind of gone back and forth of whether I really like big box shows or not.
Mm-hmm.
Mainly Blade Show is it, right? But
Yeah.
there's a lot of other smaller knife venues that have come up
There's tons of
for
them.
shows.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it seems like if things go that way, and the support is good enough, then we could probably sustain a social media blitz where we're just not allowed to market anymore on there. But I just don't think it's there yet.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm surprised nobody's really done like a online marketplace or even set up like a payment processor, for knife makers, because we basically have to go to like firearms manufacturers solutions to get around that kind of stuff. But
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I definitely do think that there's a place for it and a vacuum that nobody's managed to fill.
mm-hmm.
But man, I mean, I'm in software development and ideation and stuff like that. Solutions architecting, and like something like that, I could easily see an application that can like sustain that kind of market,
Mm-hmm.
and to give the interaction that you would get in social media could cost several $1 million.
Sure.
And it's like, what is selling like a membership for? I mean, I'd have to make a membership like $100 a month just to be able to cover the cost of that, and my return on investment would be many years. So I can understand why it hasn't happened yet, somewhat,
Mm-hmm.
but it really needs to.
Yep, for sure. Yeah, it'd be great to see something at least start, But
Yeah. So, but I mean, in the scope of diversification, so like you do some automotive work in your shop, and I've also noticed, like, at what point in time did you get involved with Jerry Moen and the manufacturing processes around his fixtures?
got involved with Jerry Moen around the year that I had entered the guild. I was introduced to him by Tyler Turner, and we just got along really well, and eventually like started helping him with kind of the tech side of his business, like running the website and things like that. And it wasn't until recently that we tried to start moving manufacturing in-house. So that was just over the last year that I really started machining like the platens and stuff like that.
Yeah. How was that to go from a I assume that he was working with another I don't know
like
what
a machine
size
shop.
manufacturer. Yeah. But was it all small batch, or was it like a larger setup? I mean, I don't really know a lot about like commercial manufacturing like that, or what the impetus was for moving to your manufacturing process. But how has that been in the transition to working directly with him and manufacturing those for him?
I mean, if you ask any company, it's always a bit of a challenge to bring manufacturing in-house. So it's definitely much more financially than anyone ever plans for. But aside from that, it's just time and getting stuff set up. So yeah, I mean, he's been pretty understanding of the time frame that it's taken. But I mean, we had our reasons. We wanted to be a little bit more agile in implementing changes that we had wanted, or that we had asked for in the past, and just having a little bit more control over things was the main goal.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, have you noticed that it's been beneficial to take on that kind of manufacturing work as part of what Prince Customs does holistically? Like, I guess what I mean is, it seems to me at least that it is probably a good diversification move to not just make knives, or supplement with other things that are personal contacts, but to actually be a supplier of the thing that you know a lot about,
Sure.
in order to be able to like have stability in that diversification.
Yeah, I guess I've always liked the idea of diversification or being able to move like really quickly to, to adapt to the times. Um, there's always something to learn. So taking on that project was partially like, personal growth. And yeah, I mean, it was definitely a good thing for the shop and me personally in the long run. Like this past year, it probably cost me way more than I made. I'll make on it for a bit, but that's all part of the growing process. And yeah, I mean, I'm a partial owner of Moen Tooling, so there's that too. Just trying to look out for the best interest of the company as a whole.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's of a benefit, I think, overall, because as Jerry gets older, there's like this whole question about like how long can you actually do things, right?
Sure.
And
Yep.
and also Jerry's legacy,
Mm-hmm.
and the way that he thinks of tooling and other
Sure.
things.
Yeah.
I mean, I have to tell you, I had Bill Roden
Mm-hmm.
on quite a long time
Yep.
ago now, and something that we had talked about is the fact that the Moen Platen and the grinding
Probably the
fixtures or
jig.
whatnot,
Yeah. Specifically. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, have been a lifesaver for somebody with essential tremors,
Sure. Yeah.
like Bill has, to be able to actually like just even think about making a knife,
Mm-hmm.
right? And like that's a really cool thing. Like even though I know it all comes from a business standpoint,
Mm-hmm.
to be able to do something with a legacy with Moen Tooling and the innovation around those things, to elongate a maker's ability to make knives,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of what age does to you,
Yeah. I mean, it's a
to me
beautiful
is a
thing.
really cool thing.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, you guys should be proud, and I mean, I would assume that Jerry is, but
For sure. Yeah.
for
I mean,
you,
he loves that aspect of it, like hearing from his customers, like seeing what they do. I mean, going back and like some stuff he told me was that a lot of the guys, they're resistant to it at first. We're proud. We can just hand grind these all day long. No big deal. Why do we need a fixture or a jig to help us out? But as they get older, that mindset flips pretty quickly when they, have less control of their motor functions and realize, hey, I mean, this can help me keep pursuing my passion for that many years longer, right? So there's nothing wrong with that.
yeah. And I also think that it's one of the difficult things I think about, uh, I guess, knives. And I don't really know if I've encountered it in a lot of other industry,
Mm-hmm.
but there is a lot of resistance to change, just period. It's like if somebody does something a new way, it's the knife maker's obligation to hate it.
Well, I think that's part of the resistance that I felt, I guess. It was that I just do weird new things like nonstop. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, I don't think it's specific to the knife industry. That's just the human condition. We're resistant to change. So,
Yeah. Well, I guess kind of on that note, are there things like that you guys are actively working on in R&D and stuff for Moen Tools that like are are there things that you like are innovating into, or is the plan to really just do what Jerry has designed out in house and continue with that same kind of fervor with manufacturing?
yeah, so I mean, there's definitely things that have been planned out or are in the works. Um, of course, with my schedule, I haven't necessarily been able to like delve into bringing that up to speed in production. But yeah, like just a couple of years ago, we kind of prototyped a lift table that could bring the grinder to whatever height you need standing, or if somebody in a wheelchair needs to like roll up to it, you could lower it to that height. There's that, and then we're doing our own power source, and the most recent thing that's being developed is probably this 1 inch version of the the rotary platen along with its own power source. That's probably the closest thing to reaching like fruition right now. And of course, our existing products like the rotary platen, I made some updates to it when I brought it in house, and then the jig right now is undergoing some revisions as well.
Yeah, that's cool. I decided it's kind of an expensive experiment for me, but knives in general are. I just, I have a day job. I can kind of support playing around with things, but I had the version 1 of the fixture, and frankly disliked it. And the only reason why I did is because pitching the head back and forth required you undoing that screw.
Yeah.
So version 2 I love.
Yeah, with the dovetails, it made a big difference.
Yeah, and then after that, I think version 3, if I remember, was the one where you could change the angle or the pitch of the
like the clamp itself.
Well, yeah, with the fine adjuster knob
Yep.
or whatever it is. What would be really cool is, and I don't know if you guys have already thought about this, is there's times, especially in hollow grinding, that there's so right now the only way to change the axis or whatever of the blade is to unclamp it and to position it in a different angle or whatever. And there's some times where like I'll have it in there and I'm like, I would really like these plunges to be more swooped forward or maybe address it on the wheel or whatever in a different way. And it's very difficult to manipulate it without unclamping it.
Gotcha.
And so what's interesting to me, at least, is to be able to adjust aspects of the position of. I mean, I don't want to sacrifice rigidity, but I do want to be able to adjust position where I can address it in different ways on the wheel without having to unclamp it and change where it's indexed, because especially if I've already made some preliminary passes or whatever, and I'm like, I can continue backing up this grind line or whatever and kind of change it around to something else I was thinking of. It's a little bit more adaptable. But that's the only other thing I think that at times, if I have to unclamp it after I've already kind of started grinding something, that's where I could use a little bit more help.
Sure. No, I mean, it's definitely great to hear what people are thinking, like, in their process. I mean, the only realistic way that I could think of when I was, like, looking at that kind of issue was, like, setting up almost like arcs on the table that the whole jig could follow. Like, you might have to move away from, like, a flat base or something like that, just so you could arc it in to the actual, like, plunge line instead of, like, trying to reposition and then, like, grinding it in. Like, you'd actually have that whole arc that brings it in, and then you get to your main bevel. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's a million ways to solve, like, these types of problems, but
yeah, well, a design that's been used forever is in photography or videography tripods. How there's a dual wheel that has teeth on it, and you can actually sub-index it to rotate the piece left, up or down. When you're pitching a tripod,
exactly.
And there is something like that where you could put something in between the dovetailing and the base where you could technically do that, I guess. But obviously it's just something I've thought about. Like if I get complex grinds like that, I don't have the option for CNC really, and so I have to go back to hand grinding, which I'm gonna say. There's a larger portion of my knives that are actually hand ground because of my indecision and exactly how I want to address certain grinds.
Sure.
Which it's good because hand grinding keeps you sharp and everything. But there are times like once I've nailed down exactly the way that I want to address things, then the jig helps me to keep that same thing consistent. and I don't have to worry so much about waste, because sometimes you can botch stuff pretty easily if you do it by hand, especially when you're working with something. So I throw away far less blades, but I still go through my normal hand grinding R&D and everything. And there's sometimes when
you can't replicate what you came up with.
Yeah, exactly. And it's you're not dealing with so many axes of movement on when you're putting something in a jig, like not the same way as you're kind of quantum calculating all these different angles in your hands and body position, based on the platen or whatever that you're using. Yeah. So all that kind of stuff kind of fascinates me. But I always go back to like hitting something on the head with a rock, the real arcane, quote unquote, like artistic side of grinding. But I do appreciate the consistency that the grinding jig allows. I just the next investment I think I would actually like to make, if there's tooling that I could buy, would be to do something like getting the wheel and platen combo thing that you guys sell, because right now I grind on a 14-inch wheel.
Okay.
And I like the fact that you can get hollow grind geometry, but it's mostly looks like a flat grind.
Yeah, on a 14.
Mm-hmm. But there are definitely some things I don't like about large wheel grinding, and I really do like the scooping that happens on smaller contact wheels. But I'd like to get into like some straight razor type of work and things like that, and doing more dagger grinds. But I mean, doing any type of attractive dagger grinds on a 14-inch wheel is kind of
too flat looking.
Well, yeah, I mean, because you really want it to like dig in there and cup that out, and you can't do it as well. But
even then, like a 10-inch might be a little big for a dagger grind sometimes.
Yeah. Especially if you're doing like ABS style Quillian daggers and whatnot, you want something that's like maybe a 2-inch wheel. Right. But even still, having some tooling like the Moen Platen, where you can index new wheels. So rather than using a 10-inch, being able to have the same apparatus and backing that you could use a 2-inch or whatever, that would be kind of cool.
Yeah. So I mean, currently it has the 10, the flat. And then on each end of the flat, there's 2-inch wheels, and you got like the slack between the 2-inch and the 10. But so it has a little bit of flexibility.
Yeah. Well, I mean, can you do normal bevel grinding on those contact wheels that are on the edge of the flat platen? I guess I've never been able to play around with one. I've seen normal demos for flat.
Yeah. So the side plates on that support those 2-inch wheels, they're recessed enough to where you'd be able to do a bevel grind with those guys.
Interesting. I'll have to look into that. I don't know I have enough money for you guys yet, but it's definitely it's kind of difficult. Like my 18-year-old daughter is like, I'd like a car at some point in time, and I'm like, man, I was like, I got equipment I want to buy. Like,
it's like, sorry.
Yeah, it's difficult having kids and wanting to play around with spending money and being reckless. But,
for
sure. I guess this last Blade show you won award for best custom M.A.C.K, right?
Yeah, the machine assisted, that new category that they came out with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and a guild award for best tactical folder.
The tactical was last year,
2023,
and then the year before 22 as well.
Yeah, so this year was the best mechanical folder.
Yeah, I didn't make it up in time for to enter anything in the guild awards this year. So.
Yeah. The timing on those things and the day, like being the day before, makes it a little bit more difficult. But what's your opinion on awards? Do you think that as like in your vein of knife making and what you're doing, that those accolades help in you building your brand?
Not sure how much it helps brand wise, because it's really just people within the industry that are watching that. um, realistically, the end users or your customers, they probably don't really care if they like the design, then they're gonna buy it anyway. Um, so for me, it's more of just like an industry validation thing, since I'm kind of going out on a limb making these weird things. Like, hey, does the industry or do my peers accept this stuff? Like, do they think it's cool or like worthy of sticking around for? That's more of what I gain from it than any like financial or branding gain that I can see.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, I guess what is like the next progression of things for your work? I mean, I know that I don't feel like that's a loaded question anymore because I understand a lot more about like how you innovate in certain areas. But do you have like when you upgraded into the like the power grid and stuff that you're doing for your machinery
Mm-hmm.
and getting other equipment and stuff, those are like big steps in a direction of more versatility. But what is like Prince Customs and what does your knives look like over the next I don't know, 3 to 5 years? Do you have like anything that in particular that you're trying to shoot for in a general sense?
So I guess now that the industry, it seems like the industry likes what I'm doing for the most part. I'm probably gonna try to get into something with a bit higher production. I've really done like super small batch, like or full custom, like here and there, up until this point. So this year, I'm gonna push a little bit harder into the manufacturing side since I have the equipment for it, and hopefully from there that'll give me a little bit more time to delve into the artistic side, and yeah, we'll see where it goes.
Yeah. Something I've been interested in, Jim Skelton has had some health issues that
Mm-hmm.
have gotten him out of doing the custom work and more into the manufacturing side,
Sure.
right? And I've actually been impressed with his relationship with
Mm-hmm.
Tuya when it comes to manufacturing and how that relationship has come to
Yeah.
fruition. Is there ever any intention inside of the mechanical world to have any division of labor or equipment or things towards like working with custom knife makers to springboard into manufacturing?
What do you mean by that? Sorry, I'm not quite following.
Well, what I mean is that so right now everything that you do inside of the world of knives um, is your design centric, right? So your design, your tooling, your manufacturing,
Yeah, it's
right?
all
The one,
right now. It's all in my shop. Yeah.
yeah. Well, what I mean is that in the future, like if somebody like me, for instance, had a design and I worked out all the details on kind of how I wanted to do it, is there any future where somebody like me can work with a custom knife maker that really understands the manufacturing process
Mm-hmm.
and take that in through the manufacturing process and have you actually produce that thing in a production quantity for somebody like me versus me going to you or somebody else that usually deals with larger volumes and I don't know larger manufacturing overhead to get to the same spot.
Mm-hmm. Um, I mean, I've kind of, I guess, tipped my toe into that a little bit with some of the collaborations that I've had. Like the first one being with Keenison and Vitesse. We did the Camdens together. Um, but that wasn't like me doing full on manufacturing. Still sent like the raw parts to Keenison for them to put the final touches on, like the grinds and the lockup and all that kind of stuff. Um, I'd have to say that my shop and capabilities would have to grow a bit more before I felt like it was a good enough value proposition for other makers and a bit more automated on my end for me to be able to even think about offering that kind of service in the future.
Yeah. I mean, and that makes sense. I ask in a general sense because I definitely see where um, there's a humongous gap between those who kind of want to do something production, because like the kind of people that I see are people like you, and and working with you know designs, and people like Brian and
Hmm.
Keenison, and Skelton working with Tuya, and it's kind of difficult as a maker to say, oh, hey buddy, can you walk me through this entire process that probably took you a long time to figure out,
Hmm.
because no real clear path to going from where having a pattern or a design that you think will work, and then actually doing small batch production for that sake. Like, to me, there's somebody like you I would trust a whole lot more to be able to actually work on that. And if it doesn't work out long term where you want to do the manufacturing,
Hmm.
I'd be like, okay, like I can probably take this on to a larger kind of agnostic manufacturer, but you understand so much about like all these intricate mechanics of knives that I would probably trust you more than just taking it somewhere else and spending, $50,000 or something in all the design and manufacturing process with somebody else.
Hmm.
I'd much rather give some portion of that money or all of it to somebody like you, because I trust you more, if
Sure.
that makes sense.
Yeah, I guess the idea of it is much better, but in reality, the like going to an actual factory it probably has its benefits. Um, yeah, me being a one man shop, even with what I think I know, I mean, these factories have been making knives for ages. So, I mean, in the long run, this probably makes more financial sense or to use these factories. Which is why a lot of the guys have been turning to Riot or Tuya and all that kind of stuff because there's not really that option in the U.S. at the moment from what I can tell.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and well, I mean, the total cost to manufacture something is a lot higher in the United States. Like, I deal with
Yeah,
that
for
all the
sure.
time because probably in the last 20 years of working in technology, there's been a lot less prejudice towards working with, like Indian
Uh
developers,
huh.
for
Yeah.
instance, or overseas ones. But back when I was like starting, there was such a humongous fervor with quality assurance and language gaps. Like, nobody was receptive towards speaking to somebody from a different
Uh
country
huh.
or call center or whatever in order to get technical stuff done, even though from a technical capabilities perspective, the United States resources didn't know any more. In
For
fact,
sure.
probably
Yep. Mm-hmm.
less. But they also cost like 20 times as
Yeah.
much. And so I'm not saying like the economy of working with people has leveled out. I mean, it's still more expensive to manufacture things, or to support things technologically
Mm-hmm.
in the United States. But then you have this entire crowd where it's like, if it's from China or if it's from any other place other than the USA, then it's like an absolute no go. And I'm interested to know if the industry will change as quality assurance and time to delivery and stuff changes as well. I'm kind of monitoring it, but there still seems to be a lot of fervor of like U.S. made. Everything has to be somehow manufactured in the United States, otherwise it's not.
Yeah.
There's no value
Well, at
proposition.
least in the knife industry, there's a lot of guys saying that, but when it comes down to it, and these guys putting their money down, they're still buying like these Chinese manufactured knives for the most part. I mean, there's guys that actually stick to it, where they're like, "Oh yeah, I want U.S. made," and they support it. But the large majority of the market is gonna put their money on a good product that costs less. So
Yeah. Well, at Blade Show Texas, my little brother went to, like, I mean, he walked around everywhere, but he previous to him buying a Civivi knife, he had some like Smith and Wesson, like real cheap frame lock, right? And I was like, hey, like, let me look at that for a second. I think maybe he paid like less than $60 for it.
Yeah, like a lot of the
And
Civivis are $30 now.
yeah, and I looked at it and I was like, dude, I was like, this was only like less than $100, and I'm looking at like the geometry, like does the symmetry look good?
Yeah.
How's the fit up look good? I mean, this was a liner lock versus a standard like frame lock, which seems to be like the more budget option.
Sure.
And dude, I couldn't honestly find a single thing I disliked about it. Like the close was great.
Yeah, the action feels nice.
Yeah, action like backwards and forwards was great. And I'm like, dude, it's really hard to dislike something because of some like prejudice, national prejudice or whatever, when you see just how good they've gotten in their manufacturing and quality control process. And I just, I hope that continues to benefit the knife making community and like ideation.
Yeah, I think, they're doing phenomenal work, and it's just going to push the manufacturers from anywhere further along. So it's good for everyone. Competition is always good.
Yeah, I think so. And I guess probably the one area that has been difficult inside of this entire knife economy is like pricing.
Yeah.
Because like I don't make pocket knives, but I make smaller size knives, and I maybe it's the pocket of customer base that I'm in. It's a lot harder to convince somebody that a pocket size, like a pocket knife size blade on a fixed blade is worth, $300 to $500, right?
Okay.
Like that's kind of like the standard. I think on pricing, but but there's some general argument about value when you're making a custom knife or a handmade knife in this case, right? It's not full custom, but a handmade knife for that general price in that size, and there's general dissent about like whether there's value in that. Pocket knives seem to be a little bit easier for the same quality of a pocket knife, but it's interesting to me how in this manufacturing processes as they get better, how that's going to affect the handmade market, because everybody knows that with custom knife makers you can go out and kind of pick list in order to get product, but when you're talking about for general consumption, like a knife that I make, I pick the scales, I pick the steel, blah blah whatever, and as a handmade knife, I'm interested to know if over time that value proposition will change, where it's like, man, I can get something for $100 that's manufactured so well overseas, and it's actually available more than just like one. Like I can buy 5 or 10 of them if I want to, and they all look the same. Versus the handmade, and I'm interested to know somewhat in the handmade craft, how that will change with time, depending like on whether manufacturing becomes more streamlined, I guess.
Well, I mean, I think manufacturing is already streamlined enough to where it has that impact, but I think support of an artist, which is basically what custom knife makers are, is always going to be there. That's what we're relying on. I mean, even these manufacturers, the custom knife market is really what pushes the industry. I mean, you see most of the innovation coming from the custom makers, not necessarily like the factory and stuff. It's always from a designer or something like that. So there's always going to be support of that other end, where this guy making it in his shop, you're supporting the maker, you're supporting like a job in your country, wherever that may be, and then the manufacturing side just fills a completely different side of the market, a different need.
Yeah. Well, I'm kind of winding down from our interview.
Hmm.
I'm interested because I really think that there is well, let me try to frame this. Um, 3D printing, I think, has been a good jumping off point for a lot of young, um, people who are thinking about engineering or thinking about tinkering with technology as it relates to
Hmm.
producing physical goods, right? And it's
Yeah.
it's been really good, but I also see like what you do, what you're doing, and what Lucas is doing, and people like that, of providing a window where young, impressionable, engineering, manufacturing type of minds are able to get into it with a little bit more ease than where it seemed like you want to be you want to get this big CNC machine and everything. It's just
Yeah.
unrealistic, right? I mean,
Sure.
it's like that's unobtainium to a young kid who wants to cut his teeth into CNC and manufacturing.
But yeah, now I mean these days you can get a software like Fusion 360, for not much or even for free on an educational license. And whereas back when I, bought my little mill, a seat of SolidWorks was like $10,000 or something insane like that. And yeah, you can get Fusion 3D printer, tinker with it for a while, play on your computer, and actually have a physical object like for a few grand, right?
Yeah,
Or if you even less if you're getting like a cheaper printer. But yeah, it's pretty wild.
yeah.
The barrier to entry is so much lower these days.
Yeah, so I mean, kind of with young knife makers listening to this, I'm interested. Like, what would be from your recommendations on quality and whatnot a good entry level like CNC machine? Like you mentioned about doing having like a tabletop unit, but what is something that you've seen that's actually like a game changer? Like you wish you would have had that in the earlier days.
Um, so there's this new company, Sile, that's bringing in machines from China that's have pretty amazing specifications for the price. If you're like jumping into like a real CNC machine, they'll start at like 30 grand and they're big enough for knife making. And yeah, that's with like factory warranty and all that kind of stuff. So I would look into that. And then Haas is still a real player because of their financing. I mean, if you're jumping into it, starting out a business, like having a company that'll back you with their financing is a pretty big deal.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, and honestly, like you could try to finance a brand new car that's like kind of like mid grade,
Yeah,
or if you really want to, instead of financing that car, you could get a cash car and you could invest in a
in
CNC
your
machine.
business. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. I mean, that's actually that makes it very obtainable. Like what in general, what does the Haas CNC start at from a entry level CNC machine?
Um, they kind of start at 30ish grand, but with any real options, they quickly get up to 50, 60 grand, like for entry level. That's why the Siles have been really kind of hitting the market suddenly. Is that they come with all the options for 30 grand with a better spindle, like faster rapids and cutting speeds and all that kind of stuff. And the footprint smaller, so realistically it could fit into somebody's garage pretty easily. Um, yeah, so
And
from 30 to 60ish is probably where you'd probably start out.
yeah. Well, and on those machines, what's their power source like? Are they running on single phase or are they running on three phase or kind of what does that look like?
The Siles are running on three phase, so you'd probably have to get a phase converter if you're running it out of your garage. Yeah,
And
and the Haas, there's some lower end options like the tool room mill that I got to start out with that can run on single phase, like a 220 circuit.
yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Well, that's a lot to think about in all of that. I mean, I can't say I embrace CNC, and I embrace it, I think, because I'm a little bit more used to technology. AI has been the weird thing inside of technology with like, hey, like how much can it actually do? But like if
Well,
any,
that's breaking into like the CAM programming and all that kind of stuff for CNC as well.
oh yeah, well,
Yeah.
something that's really surprised me is how intelligent the design is on some of those softwares, like to be able to I guess pre programmatically index holes or figure out centering geometries or things like that, where it's not like before, like when you have to use rulers and scales and math and
Hmm.
stuff, it's like a lot more complicated. But now they actually have Photoshop style filters or pre programs to be able to do a lot of that stuff.
Hmm.
And to me, that's like really cool because it does take the barrier of entry and learning curve down substantially. And I mean, I don't know. Have they gotten into a lot of like AI when it comes to like the CNC software and everything?
It's just kind of starting to break into the market, like on the machine programming side, like some basic operations. They have some software that can, pick from your tool library and kind of apply basic operations to start machining apart or roughing it. But yeah, I mean, it's just in its infancy. I wouldn't say that it's super developed quite yet, but it is breaking in. On the design side, not really. I mean, there's generative design, but that's not really anything that's relevant to the knife market.
Yeah, that is interesting because in like IT stuff, everybody's like, well, AI is going to take over everything, and uh, I actually I don't want to pay for corporate photos. Like I have to get them at some point in time, but I'm a tightwad when it comes to that stuff. So I don't want to pay for like a photo shoot and
Yeah.
having to get the suit out and
So did you do the AI version?
yeah, dude, it was awful.
Really?
Yeah, it was.
I had some friends use it that came out pretty well as long as you're hiding your hands.
Yeah, well, that's the problem is like so I have a pretty full size beard, right?
Uh-huh. Oh,
Um,
okay, gotcha. Yeah.
that wasn't it though. Like that is like the bottom end of what I was actually concerned about. So it made me lose like 100 pounds, which so I guess like
Huh.
I'm not like incredibly overweight, but it's still it totally changed my body composition. I saw my Adam's apple for the first time, which wasn't mine. It was just superimposed on somebody's face, and I had hair. Like all like they make you like submit like 20 different but similar images, and it takes that
Okay.
and stitches it together in some way on what I can only imagine is like a model backing. So
Okay.
taking the face and wiping it out and putting it with some different hairstyles and things, right?
Yeah, like onto a like professional portrait that
Yeah,
they've
yeah.
picked from somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah, and a person that kind of meets like maybe they changed skin tone or whatever to match your the images that you submitted that they sampled from, and dude,
Uh-huh.
it was awful. Like I mean, not only did my entire body composition change, but they removed like most of my beard. I had hair that I haven't had in like 15 years because I shave my head now, but I'm like full on balding.
I wonder if that's predominantly because, so much marketing for centuries has been based on a certain body composition, whereas just recently, we've gotten into different body shapes and stuff like that that you see in advertising. So I wonder if the stuff to compare it to just doesn't exist for the AI to draw from.
Yeah. Well, and I don't feel body shamed. It's not that. It's mostly just kind of like the exercise in who's the physicist? He was on Joe Rogan. Is it his Kaku is his last name?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, he's a physicist, and he talked like maybe almost a year ago about the fact that without quantum computing, AI is really limited in its ability to be anything more than a human readable search engine.
Sure.
And what I have found, at least in most of the AI technology, is whatever I can do through research, like going like Google Foo and
Mm-hmm.
figuring things out, it just does a little bit faster. And but largely, when you're writing in human readable form and it's interpreting it that way, it is very unintelligent. Like things don't really
Mm-hmm.
make sense. So there's this little bit of like um like kind of like uncanny effect. We're like, this kind of feels a little bit real, but it really isn't. And then you start like breaking apart logic inside of AI, and it becomes very apparent of how limited it is. Like I don't think that we're
Sure.
anywhere close to like the singularity where we're going to be
Oh yeah.
worshiping our robot overlords, but it is interesting as a tool, and I'd be interested to see how that actually plays into um, further developing out software and whatnot inside of CNC to make things easier. I don't know. It's
Mm-hmm.
to me, it seems it's more than emerging, right? I know it's been used for forever already, but like that, the balance of like with the old guard saying that CNC is not a valid form of making craft stuff, to
Mm-hmm.
me seems to be a fairly limited mindset.
Yeah, it seems to be waning at this point.
Yeah. Well, I've
I mean, realistically, when those guys started out, they probably would have bought any tool they could have that would help their game. So, yeah, it's just CNC's more available and accessible now, so it's another tool that's
yeah.
available.
Well, and
Yeah.
that is true. I mean, because even though pantographs inside of the context of knife making is still really niche,
Yeah.
any like lots of knife makers, they were like, if I could buy a pantograph, I'd love it because I can do these things. And I'm like, oh well, you're just doing manual CNC. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
basically.
yeah. I mean, and even in milling operations, there's lots of things like DRO and
Hmm.
other tools that
Or
make it.
even like the pantograph users, they're like 3D printing their profiles, right? So
Yeah.
it's like where do you draw the line here?
Yeah. Well, and I think that that's the thing. Like I definitely, when it comes to knife drama, well, in any drama, really, but especially in knives, with what I see is like always be humble and kind, because it seems to
Yeah,
me
for
it's
sure.
like you're just a tiny, like changing your objective lens to just a slightly different angle to invalidating your argument. And if you really stick to it too much, then you start removing some of these like argument points. Like,
Yeah.
I know lots of great 100%ers that also use pantographs and also use grinding jigs and also
Uh-huh.
use like DRO and all these things that are computerized. It's just it's not put into a program that executes it in a consistent way. They are the operator, the organic computer, and so
Yeah.
I really want to see in its own vein where CNC machining and things like that goes and how that affects knives. And like I do appreciate you being able to talk through that, because I think that vantage point. I think hopefully it changes some of the perception around that, because there is
Hmm.
still a lot of holdouts, and I don't really respect the Puritan attitude too much. I mean, it really kind of just is a little bit of perspective change, and then it becomes a lot
Hmm.
harder argument to try to put
Yeah, I
up
guess
with.
the most pushback I ever like actually saw was probably in one of the skeleton videos on YouTube. There were a bunch of comments, anti CNC, or oh, there's no skill in doing this or that using a machine. But I mean, when I like actively engage like those people that were trying to say that, I would just explain it to them. It's like I spent my time, building up my hand skills back in the day. I understand that, your motor memory, your motor skills and building up your motor memory is, it's something that takes quite a while. And just in that same vein, I'm also putting resources into building up these other skills that allow me to use a different tool. And they all seem to understand that, you look at it from a tool standpoint instead of, just I'm doing it this way versus using a robot or something like that. It's just a new skill that you decide to learn. And yeah, I mean, you're either proud of your skills or not. And you understand that there's new things coming along that can make you better or not. So.
Yeah, well, I have mad respect for the intellect that goes into it. It's not a brainless function, and I couldn't do it. And I've tried programming so many times in many different scenarios, and I am about as lame-brained as it can get. I just don't think that way. And so even though the mode of manual labor and craftsmanship works for my physical acumen with things, I have a profound respect for the very few people in the world. Collectively, if you take all the knife makers that have been able to bang out steel after forged and fire and things, and you take the number of knife manufacturers in CNC, there is very, very few that can operate CNC in a way to use it and expressively inside of the art form. And to me, that should be some litmus test into the complication that arises from trying to use that tooling for very complicated tasks.
Yeah, I mean, could say that, but there's also like a huge financial difference in building on a shop that has CNC capabilities versus, getting a 2x72 and a grinder and, or a forge and that kind of stuff. So there's that too.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I get it, but I also don't tell my wife how much I've spent in the shop, because all the different equipment that I've gone through and testing things out, and I wish it was as simple as just 2x72 and run, but all of the additional handle materials and things that I've got for different types of designs, all of that stuff, it adds up. And
for sure.
If I think about it, my total investment over the last 7-8 years has probably been, I probably could have gotten into CNC work if I would have been patient and thought about it as a financial investment. Whereas I've grown out a knife shop over time and probably spent that much or more. And it's one of those things where I think to each their own for sure. But you can easily dance in the $60,000 to $70,000 range to build out a competent shop if you've been making knives for 10 years. Some people can do it real easy and with rudimentary machinery, and that's another level of craftsmanship. But it's I think again it goes back to being humble and kind and a little bit appreciative of the skill set that it takes to be able to organize all that stuff, because there's lots of people who are not electrically engineered either to be able to know how all the electrical fixtures and supply and how to run a business and everything like that to offset the cost of things.
Mess,
yeah,
right?
Dude. It's the reason why you're the guild secretary. I mean, I think it makes a lot more sense to somebody who knows numbers and knows business to be able to do business quality finance and stuff. So, I appreciate you and I appreciate what you're doing, and you make, mind-bogglingly cool knives. And
no, thanks so much.
And it's been a pleasure to get to actually sit here and talk to you finally and just pick your brain a little bit. So, I mean, I really appreciate your time because I know it is valuable.
No, thank you. Yeah. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for spending your time with me on this episode of the Good Old Blades podcast. Remember that you are worthy, loved, and may God strengthen and bless you on your own journey in this crazy thing called life.